we either get heavy exposition or we get heavy ambiguity. And I think with these characters, you get a lot of ambiguity, and that doesn't necessarily...
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers, so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our co-host, Andrew, to review the third installment in the Matrix series. That's right, we're talking about Matrix Revolutions, a 2003 American science fiction film written and directed by the Wachowskis. So, Andrew, what is your initial impression and rating for Matrix Revolutions? Number 3.
This is a film that aims to be grand and momentous. It is, I feel like it fails to do that and ends up being a lot emptier than it intends to be. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its good moments, but it definitely drags on, and I think it's lacking a lot of what it thinks it has. I end up giving this film a 5.15.
Okay. So that, depending on how you see your review of the second one, could be the second best, or it could be the greatest of the ones you've viewed so far. As we all know, you haven't been the most flattering of the Matrix series, so
True.
No shocker there. This didn't get a high rating in your bar. Personally, I have seen that a lot of people do not like this film. There's overall the Rotten Tomatoes especially gave it a 33%. So there's a lot of people who have beef with this one, mainly because of how it's not got the same allure that maybe the first two do. I think, for one, that it ends it in a satisfying way, in my opinion. I think some of the ideas may be questionable, especially if you don't agree with the ideology that they're coming from. But overall, I found it a enjoyable little romp, and as a result, my review reflects that. So no surprise there that we're going to have a little bit of difference, but I gave it a 7.4. So we'll get into why that's the case today. But if you are curious, first, Andrew, you want to give the audience a summary of what Matrix Revolutions is all about.
Matrix Revolutions picks up right where the other one left off, pretty much. You have Neo and all the other characters fighting against the machines. That's basically the whole movie, fighting against the machines. People die, people win, the fight continues. He fights Agent Smith, he ends up beating Agent Smith, then Neo dies. And we all live in harmony, or so we think.
Sure. Yeah, it ends right at the end of the war, so whether or not they actually live in harmony, I suppose, could be up to conjecture. But everything that they leave you with, especially considering that the next one isn't made until 18 years later, leads you to believe that they do live in harmony. So that is the film. Now let's get into it. We start off with, we're exactly like what you just said. They left off with the machines are coming to take out Zion. You see that there is the last two ships that remain trying to get back to Zion, and then Neo decides it's time for him to commandeer one to go to the Machine City. What are your thoughts on the reintroduction of the characters, especially the reintroduction of our protagonist, Neo?
It's okay. I mean, it feels a little slow considering where we left off. So, I think this is another thing, is that this film, and I'm pretty sure I've made this comment about the other Matrix films, is it's either overly ambiguous or it's heavy on the exposition. It's not like they have an in-between for these films, and I feel like the opening falls into the heavily ambiguous category in a lot of areas. And it doesn't have this like level of urgency you'd expect considering where it's picking up from.
Sure. I mean, yeah, the opener definitely... the opener is decent, but it's definitely not like the right at the start everything's going as crazy as it was previously, especially if you're looking at it in regards to some of the things that we were seeing previously. They were in the middle of this massive fight, and now they're in the aftermath of that. Now, granted, you'll have a breather room, I didn't think there was a big problem with that as they're trying to reestablish what is the main priority, right? You see that the ships are trying to get back, and then you see Neo has this alternative goal to go off and fight the Machine City. And he says basically the more or less the Star Wars line, I have a feeling, which isn't exactly, as it turns out later, where he's coming from. It seems like he actually knows what he needs to do. He just didn't tell anyone what he thinks he needs to do. So the over-ambiguous part, I can see where you're coming from, which is, I will admit right off the bat, one of the bigger flaws with this film specifically is this idea that while we talked about dialogue, at least briefly in the last two films, whether or not the dialogue is good, I will readily admit that the dialogue in this film is awful. It is not good. It is a lot of very vague, intentionally vague lines that are either supposed to sound really cool or supposed to convey some hidden meaning that it doesn't really mean anything. And so as a result, you look at it and you go, okay, well, what was that supposed to be? And you have, for example, Neo at the very beginning of the movie saying, I know what I must do. And everyone's like, okay, what is it? Like, all right, why are we putting lines like that in there? But overall, I still think that it pushes the story forward as you see Neo goes off to do his own thing, as the rest of everyone tries to get back to Zion as quickly as possible. And this creates the dichotomy you see in the film where you have all of the people protecting Zion for a good portion of it, and then Neo's little foray off to the Machine City. And I will say, within that, I did skip over the idea that Neo first has to escape from this place that is the train station, right? And there's the train man is the guy's name, who holds this more or less this conduit between the real world or the plug into the Matrix and getting out of the Matrix for both machines and humanity. And it's this area that they have to get out from by more or less threatening to kill the person who controls the train station, which is the Merovingian, I believe his name is. And his character is the one we saw in the last one, who's this rogue agent element that no longer has a role given to it by the architect, but continues to exist and has eluded capture within the Matrix system. We can get into all of the side tangents and paths that then spawn from there. But first, what is your thoughts on that reintroduction where they do free Neo?
It's okay, I guess. It wasn't like it shocked me, but it wasn't like I went, well, that was garbage. It was kind of just like, he's been freed.
Yeah.
The story progresses.
Yeah, which is why I think I kind of skipped over it at first, because the idea of it is pretty much, okay, we got Neo back and that's the goal here. And they kind of hinted that it could have been cool, it could have been interesting when you have gosh, I'm going to get his name right. Hold on a second. The Merovingian, the Frenchman who is there. He indicates that this could have a whole side quest where he goes, well, all right, I will free Neo for you if you bring me the Oracle's eyes. Almost like a poetic, I'm going to, screw the Oracle. I'm going to do things my way. There is no, foresight that you guys have been seeing through the Oracle in this entire time. You have to play by a quid pro quo and a give and take kind of mentality that I have always believed in. And instead, of course, of going down this other path they could have gone down, you have Trinity say, how about this? I'll not shoot you in the head and you let him go free. And then that whole side thing that could have happened just falls by the wayside. So they had interesting ideas I think they could have explored with that. But at the end of the day, they're like, this isn't the core to where we want to go with the story. So they choose not to go down that. It was a conduit, I will readily admit. And I think the reason that you then beg the question of why even have Neo spawn into the trainman's train station, I guess. Anyways, it's at that point it becomes a side tangent. And the only reason I see is because of the little dialogue they have between the different, not agents, programs that exist within the Matrix that are trying to get their daughter some level of freedom. And they were trying to establish two things within this first scene, which is one, this idea of karma, and two, the idea that there are also agents and machines and programs within the Matrix that also are being oppressed by the system rather than just humanity itself. Did you think these themes were interesting, especially as they're developed this early on in this film? Kind of newer ideas compared to what we had seen previously.
I feel like where this movie suffers in my mind, or one of the areas, is that in relation to the second film, I talked a lot about how there isn't much that they actually accomplish, whereas like there's lots of unnecessary bits, but I don't know that it causes the movie to suffer, and that was why I was torn between either a really low rating or a really high rating. And so the idea that's like, we don't need all of this, but the movie still hits all the marks that it needs to. In this movie, I think it has a lot of unnecessarily long fight scenes, and it's just very heavy on the action. I think there are subplots that suffer that probably deserved more attention, this being one of them. I feel like they kind of introduce this little girl, she exists for a little bit, and then she just kind of disappears, and it's not really explored, and then she just shows up towards the end, and it's like she has we suppose she lives happily ever after with what is it? What's the old lady? The
Oracle? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of those things that, for the sake of time, they didn't really explore. It is a new idea within the story itself, and maybe by the end it would be worth. Maybe we'll just bookmark that for now. Is where I'm going with this, because it will be interesting to see compared to that where you would think that should have been explored more and something else would have been cut, as an example. Because 2 hours, I think, is a fairly good amount of time to be given to a film. I don't know that this needs to be a 3-hour long epic. So what probably deserves to lose time compared to that would be an interesting foray by the end of that. Or how could this have been done better, right? But I don't want to get too caught up in that right now, because there's still two core elements of the story that should be discussed. And one of them is the fight at Zion, and the other is the path of Neo. So let's go over the fight at Zion, because that takes up a good portion of the middle of the film, and for the most part, you really don't see much of Neo until the very end of the film anyways. So what are your thoughts on the return of Niobe and Morpheus and all of these other characters back to the home of Zion to try to protect it while everyone holds fast against the incoming onslaught of machines?
Are you asking about like the individual characters, or just like as the plot progresses?
I think both are important to discuss here, because one, this is the development of these characters, but two, it is a good portion of the film, and so you're seeing the development of Niobe, of Z, of Link, of Morpheus, and what their thoughts are in the middle of this battle. So do you think that it's compelling, first off, and then if you want to go through each of those characters as you think they're appropriate, that would be appropriate to discuss here as well.
Well, I mean, I think the fight between the machines and the people is pretty basic. That doesn't necessarily make it bad, but it's just they're never going to win, so we might as well fight to the death, pretty much. When it comes to the individual characters, Morpheus as a whole, I think is, in my opinion, is probably the worst of his showings. Primarily because his whole shtick of being this devout follower just kind of stagnates. He just has faith at this point, and there's no real development for him throughout the film. He just begins and ends the movie pretty much at the same place, except for like the one line where he's like, "I never thought I would have lived to see the day like once Neo wins and they've defeated the machine army." Trinity's character, I think, is pretty much similar in the sense that she is whittled down to just this idea of devotion to Neo, and then like doesn't really have an arc by the end, except she actually dies this time, surprisingly enough. and Neo didn't have superpowers to save her, which I find to be really stupid, which I didn't think I would say before this. But he's shown that he can save her previously, so why can't he now?
Sure,
Niobe,
we'll get to Neo in a bit, but
yeah, Niobe. Same thing, I guess. Like, she just kind of exists. Like, she's given a caricature and it just exists throughout the film that isn't really explored, and there isn't really an arc for her. So, and then all the soldiers in Zion are pretty much just interchangeable. Like, I don't give a crap about any of them. They just are there, they're fighting, some die, some don't.
sure. I mean, and they try to do some development of, say, the general who's leading the charge, or the commander of them all to some degree. Yeah, I would say as a whole that the defenders, other than Morpheus and Niobe and the attempt at Z, for example, are not super developed. I would make the argument that there is actually a little more nuance of all the characters to Niobe and Morpheus in a couple of ways. One, I would say that Morpheus's character actually is a character who's caught between a rock and a hard place. And what you see is that he has been this character who has been devoted to the idea of the one, that he is committed to this no matter what. And you see that at the end of the last film, this idea that he realizes that in some ways he was part of the ploy of the Matrix from the start, right? This idea that the Oracle is part of this machine that tells everyone what they need to do to get the system to continually run. And you know that he has now come to realize that this is a lie, and that his idea that he was supposed to find the one that actually saves them might not be what his discussion with the Oracle was actually supposed to accomplish, is actually find the one, that he was more or less supposed to keep the system running. And you know this because when they go to see the Oracle, she tells them what they need to do, and then he goes, well, how do I know that I can trust you? Right? And then she says, you don't. And this is this whole idea that he has been living this constant devotion, and now he has come to question it and come to say, well, is this true or not? The difficulty is now they don't have any more time. They don't have the ability to actually fight back in a meaningful way because Zion is about to be destroyed. And so that's where you get the situation later where he's in front of the council and you see the commander, Zone, I think his name is. I forget what the commander of Zion's forces is, but more or less they look at it, the council looks at him and says, is there any hope for us? And then the commander looks over at Morpheus and says, ask him. He's the one who has faith. And Morpheus at that point is supposed to say, well, yes, of course there's always hope. And he's in some ways thrust into this idea of like, wow, now you have to eat what you've prepared, that you have this devotion you've given to this cause, to this person that you believe will save us. And now will he actually save us? And he has nothing to do but say, yeah, he's going to save us. He has to save us. And there is no other option. And so while I think that I will say of all of the characters who have bad dialogue, I think Morpheus is the least in regards to truly failing in regards to that, because I don't think he has a bunch of glaring lines. And a lot of his times are spent more with, well, how is he reacting to the situation rather than what does he say that indicates these types of things. Do you disagree with that?
I see what you're saying regarding like his struggles. I think I would just echo kind of what you're saying, in that I think it doesn't really terminate throughout the film. Like we and I may be misunderstanding what you were saying towards the end there, but I just don't think we are given any opportunity to really see that explored.
I mean, to a described full detail analysis, no, probably not. And like I think the lines they give are enough to indicate that struggle is there and that it's definitely a concern of his. But yes, they do not. Some of the, if you really wanted to like dive deep into that, no, that is not delved deeply into either. Same kind of thing I think you would say with Niobe. Niobe is not a believer, but she ends up believing in Neo, which is kind of the counter to Morpheus's struggle, if you will, where she goes, I don't really believe in the one, but I believe that Neo can do some incredible things. So if anyone can bring us out of this, it's this guy, and that's why she ends up giving him the ship to go off and go to the Machine City. So there's like a almost like inverse type of arc for these two characters, where one starts to go more toward a path of belief where she's not fully convinced, but she's more convinced than she was previously, versus Morpheus, who was an ardent believer, who's now starting to go down this alternate path. Now, neither of those terminate in a different way, because at the end you see Morpheus and Niobe are proven correct when Neo ends up saving everyone. But suffice it to say, I would say that the arcs are still there. The characters do still have a more of a termination in regards to a unique struggle and difference in what we had in the second one. And I think that overall it adds to their characters more than what we had seen previously.
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we're going to have to disagree. I think ultimately my take on these characters is just that you have some material there. Like, this is when at the very beginning, you ask, what are my thoughts and impressions? I think it aims to be grand. It aims to be impactful, and there's a lot going on. I think these characters have the material to be set up. I just don't think they functionally go through these arcs, and I think they suffer because of the fact that the film spends so much time on this battle with Zion and the machines, and then the fight between Neo and Agent Smith that just draws on and on and on. And when you only have a 2-hour film, you have to be willing to sacrifice some of that combat for actually developing the characters. And it's like, going back to another idea, is like, we either get heavy exposition or we get heavy ambiguity. And I think with these characters, you get a lot of ambiguity. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need exposition, but you just spend a little bit more time on these characters, and you can show how does it terminate these cracks that are showing in or formulating within Morpheus's belief system. Like, have a moment where he has to choose in his faith versus reality, or a breaking point that he might come to. And you don't need to show him like rage against the machine per se, or against his faith and denounce it, but you can show a scene where he is actually questioning Neo, and like have the audience truly resonate with that, rather than what I think is having to happen, which is reading into these lines of dialogue that he's giving that are very select. And I mean, you take into account the fact that this movie is regarded so poorly. I think that goes to show that like most audience members aren't picking up on this this arc that Morpheus is having. In their minds, he's a very stagnant character.
Okay,
to the casual observer.
Sure. Well, okay. Let's be clear. There's two different ratings here. The rating that I just gave of 33% is the professional rating, if you will. That was not the audience score. The audience score was much higher. But second off, we all know that we don't agree with other reviewers oftentimes in here.
Sure.
So let's not use that as a metric. It was more so interesting that it is highly disregarded, and oftentimes those were, I will say, looking into those reviews, they were conflicting in many ways. Some going to the degree of like, there wasn't a crazy big revelation like what we got in the first two films, to, I thought this film was boring because it didn't have enough fight scenes. It was a snooze fest. And it's like, okay, well, those are two very different, like, takeaways to take from this. So I don't think that at least the reviews of other people were even united on what was wrong with this film. But that aside, yes, I think you make a good point that they could have had more there to show Morpheus's concerns or flaws, and maybe even having him struggle with some sort of decision would have been a very good add for his character, right? To show, okay, he has this concern about Neo. How does that terminate and affect him as he fights in this final battle, right? We don't really see that. And I think that would have been a very interesting add for him as a character. Do I think that means he doesn't have an arc? No. But does that mean his arc could have been stronger? Sure, absolutely. And I think that it wouldn't have taken a lot of scenes to do that.
Sure. I think for myself, I would have needed at least one, maybe two, and these scenes don't have to be long, but I would have needed something more to actually buy that he truly does have an arc.
Okay. Sure. I mean, in the whole fight in Zion is pretty much a war of attrition, and you see it play out slowly with and I think maybe one of the reasons someone might find it boring, which is why it might be worth this diversion, is that you're seeing the same technique being used in the fight the entire 30-45 minutes you see of the fight in Zion, where it's just an overwhelming force of machines. They try to destroy the machines, they can't, they delay them. Oh wait, more are here. Oh, they delay those. Oh, more are here. Oh, they delay those. More are here. Right? It's just an overwhelming force of evil. And sure, that's the goal, right? If there's anything that's going to beat them to a pulp, it's just hammering them over and over again with the same process. So it's not like the machines are getting nuanced in their fight, but it shows that they maybe didn't have a unique playstyle. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the better example of a war of attrition and humanity fighting for survival, I don't know if you're already thinking of it, the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I was not thinking you were gonna say that.
What did you think I was gonna say? Something about Attack on Titan? I could probably think of one, to be honest. The Return to Shiganshina arc? No, Helm's Deep, I think, is my favorite example in storytelling, specifically cinema, of humanity just fighting to survive. And it's like the last bit of these people fighting for their lives against an overwhelming force that just keeps on coming. And no matter what they do, they're not going to stop it. And there's almost no hope, but they're going to fight anyways. And they're waiting for this figure to save them. And that figure is Gandalf. In this movie, it's Neo. I think the difference is that this film just ends up being the same thing the entire time, rather than there being nuance and changes and like moments in which they think, oh, we might actually have a leg up right now, and then being shoved back. Like it's in Helm's Deep, it's this up and down, and you have moments for each of these characters that are both driving the plot, but also building on their characters as they progress. Like, going back to Morpheus, I think a perfect way to show this idea that he has these cracks forming, as you are proposing, is you have a moment, right? When all these people are fighting for their lives, fighting for survival, you have people who are going to break, people who are going to lose faith. You have this in Attack on Titan with characters like Flock, who's like, if we're all going to die, who says we need to follow your orders, right? You have instances of characters, or an instance where a character begins to question, and Morpheus basically shuts him up and says, no, Neo will save us. And then you could show Morpheus' own internal conflict. Maybe there's a character close to him who's like, are you sure about that? And you don't even have to have him speak, but you could just have him pause and be like, I don't know. And just like, but we're going to fight anyways, right? You show him keeping this idea alive, to keep the spirit of humanity alive as well, to keep pushing forward, even though he knows at this point he can't be sure, but he knows that if he gives in, the rest of humanity is going to crumble as well. And so it becomes less of a, we are going to fight because Neo will save us, and more of a, even if Neo doesn't save us, I can't allow humanity's spirit to die here, because if their spirit dies, we all do actually die in this moment in time. And so I think moments like that would have made this fight against the machines so much more engaging, rather than just wave after wave after wave of machines while humanity just continues to die and fight them off and hope that Neo saves them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And even piggybacking off of that is this idea of where is necessarily the emotion behind the fight that is going on. I mean, sure, everyone's like, oh no, everyone's going to die. That's not an uncompelling reason to be engaged in a fight, right? But there's also the way that you relate to the characters is by seeing their individual struggle in the midst of that fear, right? So how are they reacting? Going back to what you were saying with Morpheus, sure, that's a great example. But even seeing, for example, other characters, you get a little bit of it for Z as a brief synopsis of her character, where she sees the one that she's interested in Link, who's on the ship, she wants to keep fighting for the sake that she hopes to see him someday. And I think that's the only small smidgen of an idea that you get, that there's an individual here fighting for this cause because they have something they want to see, that they want to still believe is alive and is there for them at the end of this fight. Versus everyone else is like, we're just fighting because we want to live. And, it's fine. It's not like a bad reason. But that combined with the idea that the machines are just doing the same thing over and over again doesn't add a lot of nuance to the fight. And even going back to Helm's Deep, yeah, that's a great example. You see, at the very least, from a visual entertaining aspect, to see that push and pull, you get different techniques going on, right? You see that Saruman sends in the giant bombs to end up blowing up the wall, and the armies react by having their troop of elves come down and fight and charge the enemy through the blown up hole in the wall, right? And then they end up getting forced back, and you see this back and forth going on between the armies as they try to combat each other, as the ladders are being clamped down against the wall so that they can scale the wall where the orcs come to overwhelm them, right? Where Aragorn throws Gimli onto the bridge so that they can clear the bridge and help to reinforce the gate. Things like that. It's like you see these different push and pulls going on that help try to reset the game, trying to reset the balance on the field. And of course they end up being pushed back. It's like they are losing to a point where they do despair, in the same way that you get despair in this one at the end. The people in Zion believe that they're going to be destroyed at the temple, and so they're waiting for this final holdout where they will be crushed. In the same way that you see that Theoden and his troop are saying, well, we're going to die, we might as well ride out one last time and take as many of them with us as we can. So it's not like you don't have similar conclusions by the end of each of these fights, but you don't necessarily get a wave of emotions, if you will, between the characters. And you see some of that emotion in the characters in Helm's Deep, right? You see Theoden saying at the very end, like, so much death, right? And he's bemoaning the fact that he cannot save his people. Like, that's significant. It is a very despairing moment. So and even you get that beforehand with Aragorn. And so we could go on and on, but that's a very good example.
Yeah, I think a couple of final points between contrasting the two. Narratively aside, I think Helm's Deep just has a better setting. The music's better. The dialogue's better. So, you have that level that's added to it. But I also think, in terms of the casualties that they experience in Helm's Deep, they feel more impactful to the audience. You have the character of Haldir is his name, the elf who comes. Even though it's like, I don't really know this guy, I don't care for him that much, you do know that Aragorn cares for him. And so you get to see that emotion that's we as the audience can feel by proxy through Aragorn seeing his friend die, even though we are not emotionally attached to him. And so, seeing him die, whether it's in the theater or you're sitting on your living room couch, you yourself don't care for him, but you can buy the emotion that Aragorn exhibits in reaction to that death. And you have him acting very rashly upon seeing him die and kind of charging back into the orc fray there. So I think they handle that well. Better, actually. I shouldn't say super well, because, we don't know who Haldir is
to be honest,
up until this point.
I think Haldir is the worst, one of the worst examples of a death in Lord of the Rings. I also just despise slow-mo deaths that have that you have no emotional sentiment to before they die. I think they are the worst waste of screen time. So I think if we don't care about them as audiences, I don't think that trying to make them impactful through a death like that is adding next to anything to the film.
I think it adds some. I think, again, we're just going to disagree here. I don't think the intent was to get the audience to care. I think you're pulling at strings. Well, clearly you would agree that Helm's Deep is a better battle than this one. So
yes, I agree. Use a different point.
I don't think his death is meant to be one that resonates with the audience as much as it is to drive Aragorn's character forward. So that's why I think the death still adds something to the fight, as opposed to just showing characters die in gruesome ways in the fight against the machines and expecting us to care about them, even though there's not even really characters that seem to care about them either.
Right, like the general who ends up getting killed as he's trying to fight the machines, and then the kid takes on the mech suit to then open the gate, as an example. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
They're both. I would say that both of those, his death and Haldier's death, are in the same vein of you're supposed to feel, oh, they're emotionally significant, but at the end of the day, they're really not. And so you go, okay, I didn't really know about this character. I don't know why I care about this character. Why is he here? And so, why did we put time on his death when we could have spent time, for example, dealing with Morpheus's struggle?
Yeah, and my point is not that Haldier's death is necessarily better. My point is that the death itself builds into a character that we do care about, and that actually has some sort of progression throughout this event, if you will. As opposed to, like, we don't really care about any of the characters involved in the deaths. We care about characters like Morpheus, Neo. We care about, I don't know why, Trinity. But those characters are the ones we want to see screen time of, not just random people dying off. So if we're going to show someone die, we want to see it relate back to those characters and how it impacts their arc throughout this film.
Yes, at a minimum. So if you buy Andrew's argument, then there you go.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on Neo and Trinity? Because honestly, that whole arc with Zion, like, that's it. That's the whole thing. And that's pretty much what you get for half of the movie. I still enjoyed it, clearly. I didn't think it was completely flawed. Part of that has to go with me believing in an arc with Niobe and Morpheus that Andrew thinks is not there. But we just discussed that, so we're good on that. Okay. What are your thoughts on Neo? I delude myself. Interestingly enough, let's get into Neo. What are your thoughts on Neo and Trinity in this arc?
I feel like Neo fits more into a mythological hero caricature than an actual development throughout this film. In the sense that I don't really see him struggle in the film. It is more of a, this is premeditated, I'm just part of the system, we're going to progress towards the end. And you, like, have Trinity's death, which is emotionally devastating for him. And maybe this is just because I don't really like Trinity's character in this film, but I didn't feel emotionally devastated when she died. Speaking of non-impactful deaths for the audience, I was surprised that he died, though. I will admit that. I was not expecting him to just die at the end. So I was half expecting him to, like, somehow merge with the machines or something and, like, permanently be stuck in the Matrix. Granted, I have no idea how he comes back in the fourth movie, so
yeah, I don't either.
Who knows?
I mean, I haven't seen it, though, so we'll have to save that for that. But
come back next time to see our reaction to that. It's actually just
like,
John
Wick.
Wick. He decided to go into the Matrix. That's why he has long hair. Anyways,
hilarious.
I think Neo's the strongest character out of all the ones portrayed in this film, but that's not saying very much considering my takes on pretty much every character. No, just every character so far has been they are super flat and don't have an arc, and there's a lot of fighting that goes on.
Sure. So there's two things about Neo that I think make him and there's one that I still struggle with back and forth, and I think part of this is just my personal preference, so this is why I gave it the rating that I did. But in regards to Neo as a character, I think that he definitely goes through his own individual senses of loss in this one, but they're different from what we have seen previously. And you see this because in the first two films, a lot of his situation is figuring out who he is, what he wants, why he's there, if he even believes that he's the one, and what he should be doing. This film is different because this film has come to the conclusion that Neo has come to, that he is the one, that he believes he is here to actually save humanity and save the people that he has been prophesied to save. And as a result, he has now taken on this mantle and fully commits to it versus something that he had not done previously, right? And so because of that, you get a lot less of this questioning and doubting that you had for him as a character, and a lot more of him just pushing forward and committing to this path. Ironically enough, I think this is the first film where I saw a character and I thought, wow, this character might actually be a White Knight character that Andrew and Avalon like so much. And this might not actually be a bunch of BS that these two people have been spouting this entire time. Am I fully committed to that? Not necessarily, because we have past precedent that he had gone through this arc in the Fast 2 films, and then you're just getting the completion of that in this one. But the idea that he is now committed to this arc and is steadfast in that in the middle of trials is definitely something that I'm more open to in this one. And you see that from the way that he goes through these fights, the way that he has, for example, this fight down with Agent Smith underneath the alias of Bane, where he took over this person, and this person ends up, in the middle of the fight, he ends up losing his eyesight, and he cannot see. And he has to then figure out how to circumnavigate that, and then he ends up getting more or less this power to see more technology, I guess, through visions of light, right? And then you see him later where he has the situation with Trinity, and he's trying to get them through the horde of enemies that are coming at them, and he's able to destroy some of them but cannot destroy all of them. And in directing her to go over the clouds and then down into the depths, crashes in, and she ends up dying in the middle of a machine skyscraper. And he then has to be basically this person that he has loved and committed to this entire time, he has to let go of to then complete the final aspect of his mission of saving humanity. And that's where he goes to make the more or less final sacrifice, which is at the very end against Agent Smith, where he dies so that humanity can live and he can make peace with the machines. So it's not like he doesn't have struggles. It's not like he doesn't have to fight in the middle of this or have losses that come as a consequence of what he's trying to do. If anything, he has more losses in this one than he did in the previous films. But he doesn't necessarily have a wavering from the path that he's going on. He's committed to it fully, and he ends up following through in that commitment to the very end.
Couple of things. So, the only way I buy Neo's character, because I don't think he truly develops in this film, I think he's pretty stagnant. The only way I buy it is under the premise that this movie and the previous one are one continuous arc, in which case his arc is completed basically at the beginning of this film. That said, I also don't necessarily buy the articulation that he's a good example of a White Knight, because he doesn't I don't see this as him choosing this path, because he doesn't really have anywhere to run. The machines control everything. So it's not like he is choosing to fight for humanity so much as he is just choosing the only path forward, if that makes sense. Now, granted, he is the person who is destined to save everyone, and so he accepts that role in a sense, but it's also like, if he doesn't accept it, what's he gonna do? Run away? There's not really anywhere for him to go. So it's more like he's a White Knight out of lack of options, and we don't really get to see what he would do in the event that he could choose otherwise. Like, if he was given a legitimate option to flee, per se, and get what he wants, which is to save Trinity, that's not really an option that's presented to him. Not only that, I'm still struggling with the whole idea of, like, the consequences of his decision in the second film. And maybe you have an answer to this. I do not see a very clear implication of what the consequences were of him choosing one versus the other when it came to the decision he was given by the architect in the previous film.
Yeah. So the solution he gets in the previous one is this idea that more or less humanity can continue to survive, but then more or less Trinity dies. And ironically enough, he does end up having to give up Trinity by the end of this film anyways. So you can question whether or not this subverts his decisions in the end of the last one. Sure. In regards to the idea of, but I would say that reflects more on the last film than it does on this one. In regards to the idea that it's like, because the whole idea there is that the architect gives him an option, right? Either you can save humanity by, in underneath the scenario that you get, to be clear, the architect gives the option that Zion will be destroyed regardless. That is the premise. And he says that the thing that you get is you get to take a handful of people and revive Zion to continue this fight. That not all of humanity will be destroyed. You get a handpick, basically, a select few, and humanity gets to continue. More or less, that's the decision that he makes to reject to give us to this current scenario. Now, in regards to this idea that it's a white knight, not really, because he doesn't have a decision, I don't know that that's necessarily like a unique argument, because the idea of a white knight is oftentimes they are already backed into a corner and have to make that decision. I mean, if you look at Captain America and the Winter Soldier, it's either, I mean, sure, he could run away instead of trying to fight the people, but at the end of the day, where is he going to run to? The government is going to find him somewhere in the world. If you look at, for example, Marty McFly, sure, he could reject the idea of trying to save his future, but then that means he literally just dies. Like, he disappears from existing off the face of the earth. So he has to choose this option. So it's not like they have other options with these previous White Knight examples we've given previously on the podcast. So I think that the idea that he still fits that paradigm flows fairly consistently with the characters we've explored previously.
I'm going to go back to Obi-Wan, because that's my favorite example of a white knight. And I'll even admit, when it comes to Captain America, I think he isn't the strongest example of a white knight in the films we've reviewed that include him. Which is why, like, when we talk about Winter Soldier, I think Bucky's a far more compelling character than Captain America is. Not to mention,
I know.
Bucky's the GOAT. But when it comes to Obi-Wan, right, I think he is, as far as I can recall, and off the top of my head, he is the best example of a white knight, because he legitimately does have the other option. The easier choice, too. To turn to the dark side, to leave the Jedi Order. When it comes to his fight with Anakin, he's given the option to join Anakin, to abandon the Order that has completely been destroyed, to abandon this code that he's held to, that he himself has struggled with too, right? It cost him, throughout the Clone Wars, multiple friends and allies. He has this love interest that's given to him in the Clone Wars that dies, that he was given multiple opportunities to leave the Order and go be with her, but he doesn't do it anyways. And so when he's presented this option with Anakin, the bit, or the kick that comes with it, is like, this is the last person he really has that he cares about that's still alive. And he could just, like, what is there left of this Order anyways to defend? There's nothing. But he decides to stick with it, not because it's the easier path, or because it's the only path that's been presented to him, but because it's the right one. And so, when it comes to Neo, it's like, that's why I think the option, like, sure, he's the white knight and he does the right thing, but it's not as compelling because he isn't truly given the option to do otherwise, if that makes sense.
I mean, in regards to, like, nuances of would he be able to escape, sure. I don't think that negates that he's a white knight character. I think that more says maybe he's not as compelling of a white knight character as Obi-Wan, which, sure, I'd be willing to buy that. I mean, I think I gave episode 3 a pretty high rating for a reason. I mean, there's no flaws there. There's definitely better examples out there, but I don't think that means that his arc as regards to being committed to a path, no matter what the cost is not there. I think it definitely is, especially because it's clear that he knows what his sacrifice is going to be. And that's where you go back to that early scene at the beginning of the film where it's talking about this idea of karma. And, you know, whether or not you like the idea of karma being a guiding force in the universe of the Matrix, it makes it clear why he knows he needs to sacrifice himself is because Agent Smith is the countering force to him, the yin to his yang, and when one force is defeated, the world tries to balance it out with another equally opposing force. So, take that as you will, but that's what this film naturally terminates in by starting his arc with that at the very beginning of it.
Sure. And to be fair, I did give Neo the most points in terms of character and like actually having something there. Like I thought Neo wasn't bad. Matter of fact, I probably end up giving both the second and third film the same rating at this point, which is just like a 5.15 or like a 5.2, because I see them as a continuous arc. I think my one critique when it comes to Neo, or maybe not necessarily a critique, but a way to make it better, would have been perhaps the machine giving him the option of survival. Like, hey, we will spare you and we'll spare Trinity and a select few others if you stand down. Like, basically giving him an out and him still deciding otherwise. Which I think also would have gone into like this idea of him not necessarily just choosing those he cares about, but him choosing reality over a fiction. Which is kind of what the whole first movie was going for, right? This idea of if you could have the perfect life, but it was fake, would you choose that over a real life regardless of the circumstance?
Yeah. In regards to like the metaphysical decisions that he has to make in the universe, he doesn't have that in this one in the same way that he had in the previous two. So yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see some sort of dialogue around that. Do they choose to go down that? No. And do I think that it's terrible because of that? No, I actually enjoyed it a lot. So that's fine. What is your thoughts on the enemy, though, in regards to how this film is terminating? You get two aspects of it. You have Agent Smith on one side, who has taken over the Matrix and become more or less the sole agent within the entire Matrix universe. And then you have the machines with the literal Deus Ex Machina, because that's the machine leader's name in this film. What are your thoughts on those two aspects of this?
I think Agent Smith is interesting. I think him and Neo are the strongest selling points of this film. Agent Smith basically comes to this conclusion that humanity must die. And even though I hate the dialogue, I do think his monologue with Neo towards the end of their fight is interesting. And you definitely get to see this emotion from him where he's almost becoming paranoid about everything because he's like, was this predetermined? What's going on? No, this can't be predetermined. And then he says that line about, what is it?
Everything that has a beginning has an
end. And then he's like, oh no, that's not right. Why would I say that? So I think he's interesting. I struggle to call him a character because it's almost like he's a million of something. But I would put him up there with Neo in terms of how interesting he is and the development that he gets in this film.
Yeah. And I will say this was one of the more enjoyable parts of rewatching these films is like even from the beginning, they put the seeds there with Agent Smith in the first one, especially, that then terminate into this by the end of the third one. I thought they did that very well. And his dialogue with especially Morpheus in the first film, I think is very good, where he's discussing this idea of being free from the shackles of the machine overlords and doing what he wanted to do as a program in the Matrix, and how he's searching for that by trying to fight the humanity. And it leads to this termination where he realizes more or less in order to be free, he has to destroy Neo and humanity as a whole. And that's the path that he's gone to on this rampage to take over the Matrix. So I think, and of course, Hugo Weaving's just a great actor. I think this is one of those times where even though his lines that he's given are crap, he just, even with that, plays them so well to the degree that you're like, oh, that's still crap, but you kind of made it look kind of cool. I think it's just a credit to Hugo Weaving and how great of an actor he is. Just so good. Also, I have to say kudos to whoever plays Bane, because they clearly were studying when they were looking at how they portrayed Agent Smith as a human in the real world, because his voice is like has the same intonations that Hugo Weaving's does, and it's so good.
Yeah, I will say that was the one portion of the film where I truly enjoyed it. I almost thought they just had Hugo Weaving voiceover for him.
Yeah.
Like it was that good, and to the point where it was like, how does Neo not like know exactly who this is at this point? Like, it's so obvious.
Yeah. Yes. So I think that definitely one of the reasons that I enjoy this film a lot is that duo. So I'm glad that you at least enjoyed that, Andrew.
Yeah, I don't hate the movie. I just think it's overhyped.
Story of Andrew's thoughts on The Matrix, overhyped.
It's mid.
Okay. Go watch your JK somewhere else, okay, bro?
Hey, at least with anime, you've got a whole season to get through the fight scenes.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh.
Also, the fight scenes are just infinitely cooler. Are you kidding me?
Some of them are.
Attack on Titan also has multi-episode battles that go on, okay?
We're not fighting about Attack on Titan here right now, bro. What are your thoughts on the other machines, though? Obviously, the Deus Ex Machina shows up at the end and makes the deal with Neo to make peace with humanity and the machines. Did you think that they were a compelling counterforce in the machine world?
Okay, my question regarding this final boss, if you will. I find it ironic that his name is Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
I just don't buy that he's gonna make this deal with Neo so quickly. And maybe you could shed some light on that. I went into this going, okay, big evil bad guy. He just seemed too amicable towards Neo from the get-go. It just felt like there needed to be more of a push and pull between the two of them.
Yeah, I think so. In regards to this character, for one, the idea is that he's supposed to represent all of the machines, right? And so they're trying to convert some of the fear around the destruction of Zion to this character specifically, saying more or less they are responsible for all of this. Does it exactly translate? Maybe to some degree. Beyond that, too, I think that it's one of the areas where it feels a little lackluster. I think it's a little on the nose to call it Deus Ex Machina because it is the idea that everything gets made right as soon as you make a deal with this machine. Of course, most people don't even know that's what its name is unless you look it up because it's never mentioned. But I think that it's unfortunate more so even from the idea that for us as audiences, there's some sense in which you are looking forward to this creature manifesting itself for the entire 3 movies. And so when they show up and all they do is make a deal with Neo and that's it, and then everything gets back to being cool, it's kind of like, oh, okay, so they're not as big and scary as we thought they were. Jeez, that's nice that they could make a deal like that and just make it all right. So yeah, I mean, was it fine? Yeah, I thought it was fine. I thought he looked scary and he looked cool. But in regards to what we as audiences were promised in regards to a big, fearful enemy and villain, I don't know that we got as much of that from them. And it was overshadowed by this fear of Agent Smith, right? This idea that the machines themselves had now realized that this program had gotten so out of control that they were threatening to not just infiltrate humanity, but infiltrate the machines as well and wreak havoc on the machine society, not just on human society. And that's where you get the ideas around, for example, Bane coming into existence in the real world as being a problem, and other concerns as well that you mentioned early on in the film with the idea of Sati, the little girl, and her mother and father, and how they are trying to live free of the Matrix. Like, there is ideas around that would be intertwined with this idea that the machines themselves have fears about being overrun and taken over by a rogue element like Agent Smith. So they don't explore that very much, other than to say, oh, we're scared of Agent Smith too, so I guess, yeah, we do need your help to stop him. But that's pretty much all you get from the Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah. By the way, do you know where Deus Ex Machina comes from?
Yeah, it was when they would literally have a god from a machine was the idea, I believe, where it was they would either have some element on the stage back during Greek tragedies, I believe, or actually it wasn't even tragedies solely, it was also comedies, but they would come out, they'd be lowered via a crane or brought up via a hole in the floor, and they would then bring some element into play to then save the heroes from whatever tragic results they were stuck in that they couldn't get out of. Well, it turns out the gods helped them, and a god would come in and be like, here you go, buddy.
It just, like, it translates to God from the machine or something, and this is a literal machine named Deus Ex Machina. So,
yes.
Anyways, a little on the nose there, buddies.
Yes.
Shall we proceed?
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on the themes of this film? Do you think that they terminate well in an interesting message for the audiences?
I think the themes were terminated better in the first film, to be honest. But I mean, they still kind of continue them throughout this film. They like have that one line where Agent Smith is asking Neo, why? And he goes, because I choose to. Which is, I feel, a little on the nose and a bit anticlimactic. Because it's like, okay, we get that you choose to, but that's not the why. I want to know why you choose to. Is the why simply because you can? Also, I don't know that you really do choose to, considering this was forced upon you at this point. So, those are my thoughts on the themes.
Yeah, I mean, other than the idea of love being changed somewhat in this one compared to the previous films and being a more vague, like, I love the world compared to I love Trinity being the main driving theme of the previous two. They're definitely going along with this theme of karma and the equal and opposite reaction, as I mentioned previously. This idea that when you have one force come into play, another force comes to counter it. And so it's more or less this idea of balance, which is why it makes sense that at the end of the movie, it's not like humanity wins. It's more or less humanity and the machines are at peace because they are now equal and opposite forces to each other who can live in harmony rather than being constantly at war with one another. So it fits the story and narrative they are trying to go for. I think that they terminate that theme fairly well from a narrative standpoint. This is where I personally don't know that I agree that's how the world works, that it is like an equal and opposite universe, that everything comes out as a result of a consequence or reaction to everything. But it's not like they didn't portray that theme in a rather cohesive and interesting play out, especially with the way that Neo sacrifices himself to destroy Agent Smith by the end of the film. But they're there, and I think that they're decent. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film? Do you think that it has a lasting impact, will continue to have a lasting impact? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, clearly it had enough of an impact for them to make a fourth one.
Yeah, like 18 years later.
I think in terms of impact, we all look to the first one. Most people will go, oh yeah, the Matrix movie. I don't think the second two, considering I look at them and see a continuous arc, I see them more as one plot really broken into two films. I don't think they have nearly as much of an impact as, say, like the first three Pirates movies did, where you have the first one, which is recognized as this is Pirates of the Caribbean, but also the second two movies that follow it are widely recognized as like, these are the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. The Matrix trilogy is not often one that is considered as much as just the Matrix movie.
Yeah, for sure. And when people talk about the Matrix, they are generally talking about the first one. And the first one has all of the accolades that people talk about, right? They're talking about the red pill versus blue pill scene and situations like that, having the wool pulled over your eyes, or, you know, having some sort of revelation where you realize the truth that everything you understood about the world is a lie. All of that is coming from the first one, versus this one is just trying to terminate that in a way that you see some like peace to the galaxy, if you will, type scenario. And so that's where I think you get some of the critiques with this film compared to the other ones. Is, you know, the first one had a lot of revelations, the second one had a huge revelation at the end, and this one doesn't really have that. It's more of bringing all of those loose ends to a cohesive conclusion. And so I get from that degree why it doesn't have as much of a praise in regards to the general psyche of the universe, and why it won't be recognized as the best of the three by a lot of people. Do I think that the arc is important? Yeah. Do I think that it terminating well is significant? Yes, I do. And do I think that it terminates satisfyingly well? Yes, I do. But clearly people disagree with me, and that's fine.
Well, you'll have to get.
Do I think this one's
you'll
going
have to be fine with it. So,
yeah, I am. Yeah, and people won't remember this one as much as they'll remember the first one, and that's fine. And that's what we got. So that is the third Matrix, Matrix Revolutions. We'll have to see Matrix Resurrections next time, where we'll both give our first initial reactions when we come back next week. And you'll see us then. So I guess that's it. We'll be back as we always are next week.
bye-bye.